The terrifying true story behind the death angels. Do you think death is just a natural process? A simple ending to life's journey? What if I told you there exists a phenomenon so disturbing, so systematically concealed from public knowledge, that merely learning about it puts you at risk? This is not fiction. This is not entertainment. This is a warning. The death angels. That's what the original investigators called them before their research was confiscated, before their names were struck from official records, before they began to disappear one by one. What began as an obscure pattern recognized by a handful of researchers in 1947 has evolved into one of the most carefully documented and ruthlessly suppressed phenomena of our time. I need to be clear. I'm not sharing this information lightly. Every person who has attempted to compile this research has faced consequences. Some disappeared, others were discredited, their careers and lives systematically dismantled. A few simply went silent, refusing to ever discuss their findings again. But the pattern continues, and someone needs to document it before all evidence is erased. It began in Black Fork, West Virginia. November 17, 1947, local coroner Samuel Weiss was called to examine a body discovered in the forests outside town. The deceased, Martin Keller, a 43-year-old mining engineer, had been found seated against a tree, eyes open, with no visible injuries. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. Natural causes, case closed, except for one detail that Weiss documented in his private journal, later acquired by researcher Thomas Holloway in 1963. Keller's eyes, according to Weiss, contained perfect reflections of winged figures, seemingly captured at the moment of death, visible only under certain angles of light. Weiss dismissed this as an optical curiosity, a trick of light on the cornea. Nothing more. 3 weeks later, a second body was found in identical circumstances. Then a third, all within a 7-mile radius, all seated against trees, all with no signs of struggle or injury, all with the same reflected images in their eyes. Weiss began keeping a separate, unofficial file. He photographed the eyes of each victim before burial. He documented the positioning of the bodies. He noted another pattern. Each victim had been reported missing for exactly 27 hours before discovery. Not 26, not 28. Precisely 27 hours from last confirmed sighting to discovery of the body. By February 1948, the death count had reached 7. Local authorities contacted the FBI. Agent Lawrence Merrick arrived on February 11th. On February 12th, all of Weiss's unofficial records were confiscated. On February 14th, the case was officially closed, with all deaths attributed to a localized cardiac event triggered by environmental factors specific to the region. Weiss was instructed never to discuss the case again. He didn't. He committed suicide on February 28, 1948, hanging. His final Ledanzhanutsi journal entry, which escaped confiscation, contained a single sentence: "They don't arrive at death, they bring it." The pattern in Black Fork ended. 7 deaths, 7 bodies, 7 reflected images. The case faded from memory, buried under official explanations and the passage of time. Life continued. The world moved on. Until December 3, 1952. Clarksdale, Mississippi. The body of Eleanor Wilkins, a 36-year-old librarian, was found seated against the wall in an abandoned barn 2 miles outside town. No signs of injury. Eyes open. Reported missing exactly 27 hours before discovery. Local medical examiner Dr. James Holland noted in his report unusual reflective properties in the corneal tissue. The death was ruled natural causes. 6 more deaths followed. Same pattern, 7 victims, all found seated upright against vertical surfaces, all with the same reflected images in their eyes, according to Holland's privately maintained records, all missing for exactly 27 hours. Holland, unlike Weiss, did not keep his concerns private. He contacted medical colleagues in neighboring counties. He wrote letters to the state medical board. He even attempted to publish his findings in a medical journal. His article was rejected. His letters went unanswered. His colleagues stopped returning his calls. On March 17, 1953, federal agents arrived in Clarksdale. They confiscated Holland's records. The deaths were attributed to undiagnosed heart conditions exacerbated by winter conditions. The case was closed. Holland did not commit suicide. He disappeared. April 2, 1953, his car was found abandoned on a rural highway. Inside was a single note: "They come in sevens. They appear as angels. They are not angels," the pattern repeated. 7 deaths in Wichita, Kansas in 1959, 7 in Albany, New York in 1966, 7 in Oakland, California in 1974. Each cluster separated by years and hundreds of miles, each following the identical pattern, each investigated by local authorities, each eventually suppressed by federal intervention. Each primary investigator either silenced, discredited, or vanished. Thomas Holloway, a criminology professor at Columbia University, began connecting these cases in 1963. What started as research for a book on unusual death patterns became his obsession. He traveled the country, interviewing witnesses, family members, and local officials. He collected what little documentation had escaped confiscation. He began to construct a timeline, a pattern, a theory. By 1975, Holloway had identified 84 deaths across 12 clusters spanning nearly 3 decades, all following the same signature, all officially explained away, all connected to missing or discredited investigators. He compiled his research into a manuscript titled "The Death Angels: A Pattern of Supernatural Predation in Modern America." The manuscript was never published. On September 14, 1975, Holloway's office at Columbia was destroyed in a fire. All his research was lost. His academic reputation was systematically dismantled following allegations of research misconduct and mental instability. He was dismissed from his position. His previous publications were discredited. He died in obscurity in a psychiatric facility in 1983, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But one copy of his manuscript survived. Holloway had sent it to a former student, Rebecca Chen, days before the fire. Chen kept it hidden, afraid to come forward after witnessing Holloway's destruction. In 1991, suffering from terminal cancer and with nothing left to lose, she passed the manuscript to investigative journalist Michael Grayson. Grayson approached the material with skepticism. He fact-checked Holloway's research, verifying death records, interviewing available witnesses, and searching for additional cases that fit the pattern. What he discovered disturbed him deeply. Not only were Holloway's documented cases verifiable, but the pattern had continued. 7 deaths in Boulder, Colorado in 1981, 7 in Portland, Maine in 1988, 7 in Austin, Texas in 1995. During Grayson's own investigation, the pattern was accelerating, the gaps between clusters were shrinking. Grayson also discovered something Holloway had missed, a connection to local folklore predating each death cluster. In each location, within the year before the first death, there had been reported sightings of unusual aerial phenomena. Not UFOs, but what witnesses consistently described as humanoid figures with wings, observed at dusk or dawn. These sightings were typically dismissed as optical illusions, large birds, or mass hysteria. They never made national news. They were local curiosities, quickly forgotten, until the bodies started appearing. Grayson compiled his findings into a series of articles scheduled to run in the Atlantic Monthly beginning in November 1997. The first article was pulled the day before publication. The entire series was canceled. Grayson was fired. His research disappeared from his home office. His computerized records were corrupted. He began receiving threatening phone calls. Strange figures were observed watching his house. On December 12, 1997, Grayson fled his home in New York. He went off the grid, communicating only through encrypted channels with a small network of trusted allies. From hiding, he continued his research, documenting 7 deaths in Savannah, Georgia in 2002, 7 in Duluth, Minnesota in 2008, and 7 in Flagstaff, Arizona in 2013. The pattern was undeniable, but the why remained elusive. What were these entities? Why did they take exactly 7 victims before disappearing? Why the 27-hour window? Why were they reflected in the eyes of the dead? And most importantly, Why was knowledge of their existence so aggressively suppressed? In 2015, Grayson made contact with Dr. Elizabeth Walsh, a theoretical physicist with a background in fringe science research. Walsh had independently stumbled onto the pattern while researching unusual electromagnetic phenomena associated with unexplained deaths. Together, they formed a hypothesis so disturbing that both hesitated to document it formally. The death angels, they concluded, were not supernatural in the traditional sense. They were interdimensional predators, entities existing in a dimension adjacent to our own, capable of temporarily manifesting in our reality. Their appearance as winged humanoids was simply the closest approximation our minds could construct of their true form. The 27-hour window represented the feeding cycle, the time required to extract whatever energy they harvested from human beings. The reflection in the eyes of victims wasn't a reflection at all. It was a capture, the last thing they saw before death, permanently imprinted on the cornea through a process unknown to conventional science. The entities were visible only at the moment of death, when the barrier between dimensions temporarily thinned. Most disturbing was their conclusion regarding the pattern of sevens. The death angels weren't random predators, they were methodical harvesters. 7 deaths created a pattern, a signature in reality itself, that allowed them to more easily return to the same dimensional coordinates. Each cluster of deaths served as a beacon, a doorway, making subsequent manifestations more efficient, which explained the acceleration. Each cluster made the next easier. The barriers were weakening, the cycles were shortening. What began as decades between incidents had reduced to years, and based on their calculations, would soon reduce to months, then weeks. Walsh disappeared in March 2017. Her research was wiped from existence. Her academic record was altered to remove certain publications. Colleagues suddenly couldn't recall specific conversations or collaborations. It was as if portions of her professional existence had been systematically erased. Grayson went deeper underground. His communications became sporadic, paranoid. His last verified message, received by a trusted contact in November 2019, contained only coordinates and a date, 47.03 de Groen, 122 non 9000 W, 12/3/2019, Aberdeen, Washington, December 3, 2019. The body of James Keller, a 41-year-old forest ranger, was found seated against a tree in the Olympic National Forest. No signs of injury or struggle. Eyes open, missing for exactly 27 hours. The official cause of death, heart failure. 6 more bodies would be discovered in the following weeks. Same pattern, same signature. What makes the Aberdeen cluster significant isn't just its recency. It's what happened afterward. For the first time in the documented history of the phenomenon, federal authorities didn't immediately confiscate records or discredit investigators. Local medical examiner Dr. Sarah Nguyen was allowed to complete her examination and file her report, including her observations of unusual reflective properties in the victim's eyes. The report was publicly available for 73 hours before being classified. In those 73 hours, it was downloaded 27 times according to server logs. The information spread, the pattern was exposed, and something changed. 7 deaths in Traverse City, Michigan in June 2020. 7 in Flagstaff, Arizona in October 2020. 7 in Eugene, Oregon in February 2021. The acceleration had begun. But now there was another pattern emerging. Each new cluster was being documented, not by official sources, but by ordinary people. Smartphone photos, social media posts, encrypted message boards. The information couldn't be completely suppressed anymore, and the death angels seemed to be responding to this exposure. The 27-hour window shortened to 23 hours in 2021, then to 19 hours by 2022. The reflected images in victims' eyes became clearer, more defined. Witnesses began reporting actual sightings, not just before the clusters, but during them. Brief peripheral glimpses of winged figures, always at dawn or dusk, always near where bodies would later be discovered. The most recent cluster, Monterey, California, September 2024, broke the pattern completely. 7 victims, yes, but not found seated against trees or walls. They were found in their beds, in their cars, at their desks, as if the entities no longer needed the ritual positioning, as if they were evolving, adapting, learning. The reflected images had changed too, no longer simple winged figures. Witnesses described seeing faces, human-like but wrong, eyes too large, mouths too wide, expressions that human muscles couldn't create. And there was something else. Something Dr. Ingyan noticed in the Aberdeen victims, something that's been confirmed in every cluster since. The brain tissue of victims shows a distinctive pattern of synaptic firing unlike anything observed in normal brain death, as if the brain remains partially active after death, processing information, receiving input. The victims aren't just dead, they're connected, linked to something else, something that continues after what we recognize as life has ended. This is where we stand today. The pattern continues to accelerate. Based on the progression, the next cluster should appear in December 2025. The location is impossible to predict, but the signature will be unmistakable. 7 deaths, no visible cause. Eyes containing reflections that shouldn't exist. But here's what terrifies me the most. What Grayson discovered before his disappearance, what Walsh calculated before she vanished. These clusters aren't random. They're forming a larger pattern across time and geography. When mapped, they create a sigil, a symbol of immense complexity that's slowly being drawn across the North American continent. 5 more clusters will complete it. 5 more 7s, 35 more deaths. And when the pattern is complete, the barrier doesn't just thin, it collapses. This isn't just about individual deaths anymore. It's about something coming through, something that the death angels are merely heralding, preparing the way for. I've compiled this information at great personal risk. Already I've observed unusual patterns in my daily life. Electronics malfunctioning, glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces, the sensation of being watched during the transitional hours of dawn and dusk. I don't expect to remain free to continue this research much longer. Why am I telling you this? Because knowledge is the only defense. The pattern has always depended on silence, on suppression, on the ability of authorities to control information. Each time knowledge has spread, the entities have been forced to adapt, to change their methods. They fear exposure. They fear being seen for what they truly are. And now you've seen. Now you know. The pattern exists. The death angels are real. They're coming again, and soon. But here's what you need to understand. Now that you've consumed this information, you're part of it. The knowledge itself creates a connection, a beacon. They can sense awareness. They're drawn to it. Check the reflection in your eyes tonight. Look carefully, at just the right angle. You might catch a glimpse of wings. You might see something watching back. Does this sound like paranoia? Like delusion? I understand your skepticism. I began as a skeptic too. But the evidence exists. The pattern is real. The deaths continue. If you've read this far, there's only one thing left to do. Share this information. Spread it widely. Create a network of awareness too large to be silenced, too dispersed to be suppressed. The more people who know, the more difficult it becomes for them to maintain their pattern. Each person who becomes aware creates interference in their signal. But be careful. Be vigilant. Watch for the signs. Unusual reflections, lost time, the sensation of being observed during dawn or dusk, winged figures at the edge of vision. If you experience these, you're being marked, you're being selected. The next cluster is coming. December 2025, somewhere in North America. 7 more victims to continue the pattern, 7 more beacons to weaken the barrier. Will you be among them? Or will you be among those who break the pattern? The choice may not be entirely yours, but awareness is the beginning of resistance. Knowledge is a defense against the dark. They thrive in shadows and silence. So bring them into the light, speak their name, watch for their signs, disrupt their pattern. The death angels are coming. They're always coming. And now they know that you know. Watch your reflection tonight. Look carefully. They're already looking back, waiting.